Good morning, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us here on April 9th, 2024. Spring showers are maybe threatening in some of the communities that are represented in our call this morning. So hopefully all of this talk about water brings the precipitation that we need. I'm Colette Bartow with the Montana State Library, and I'm really happy to introduce you to Troy Blandford, who is the Water Information Systems Manager at the State Library. That is, I think, a deceptive title because of the huge range of responsibilities that you have, Troy. So with that, if we want to go ahead and move through the slides here. That's us. And we hope that you'll be in touch with us. We can go ahead and move to the next slide. We want to talk about the water information resources. I'll share some links, and Troy will be sharing and including a live demonstration of resources. So that's kind of where we want to be and want to go today. And with that, Troy, I'm really just going to turn this right over to you. And thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Colette, and thanks for joining, everyone. Again, my name's Troy Blandford. I'm the Water Information Lead at the State Library. And that's like Colette said, that's a kind of a difficult job to kind of wrap your head around what it means. So I think I'd describe myself as a GIS analyst that focuses on water resources. And my background, my education is in environmental science and water resources. And then my graduate work was on geography and GIS. So I smashed the two together, and GIS for water resources, and very fortunate to work in a position where I'm doing what I went to school to do. So very fortunate about that. So today's topic, Montana's water information resources, titled the presentation. So I will be talking about the Montana Water Information System. The home of the water information system is the Montana State Library, and it is established to make available and readily accessible information on the state's water resources. A couple of key items there. One is it's for all Montanans, and I keep that as a focus. This isn't for state agencies or federal agencies. This is for all Montanans. So it's about making resources available, information available to all Montanans. And the other kind of key topic there is coordination with water agencies. There's lots of different water agencies: DNRC, FWP, DEQ, USGS, lots of different agencies. And the water information system is about helping coordinate and get that information out and available. On the left side of the screen there, you see the screenshot of the homepage for the water information system. And I've circled a number of topics there that I'll hit on a little bit today. Not enough time to get through everything. And so I tried to think about this as someone walking into a library, patrons, public, what are their interests in water? What are some of the kind of the bigger key main questions that we receive at the State Library? So one of the kind of tenets or kind of principles of the water information system is water information comes from many diverse sources. It can be difficult to find and discover. And so that's what the water information system is about, is making that information discoverable from one place. This slide illustrates that. So we've got a lot of different water topics and a lot of different water agencies in Montana. And it can be pretty challenging for the public or even experts to kind of navigate this whole thing. I use the analogy there of like a matrix, like a data matrix of all this data coming in and information available. It's pretty challenging to navigate. To hammer that home a little bit more, we're going to play a little game back to when we were kids and played the mix and match game. So on the left, we've got topics, water-related topics or questions you can think about as maybe a request. And on the right, we've got various agencies. We're just going to try to match those up. Obviously, we don't have much time to really make a game of this, but maybe just take a few seconds in your head to see if you can match these up. So well log information, where would you send someone for that? That would be the Montana Bureau of Mines and Geology. That's not an obvious one for sure. Fish data, this one's a little bit more easy because it's in the agency's name. Fish data. fish, wildlife, and parks. Impaired waters, so like water streams, dewatered streams, or warm temperatures, things like that. Who would handle that sort of thing? That is the Department of Environmental Quality. How about drought? Another one that's not quite so obvious. The lead for drought is the Department of Natural Resources. How about the bottom one? Information on species and habitats. Might not be an obvious connection there, but that is the state library. The Natural Heritage Program at the Montana State Library handles information on species and habitats. And the last one, I guess a bonus, kind of all the above. Like if you're not sure where to send someone, what can you do? Send them to the state library. That's what the water information system's about. And I'm not implying here that we have or are experts on all this data you see here, but we're going to get you to the right place. And that's our purpose. So I think this is further illustrated, like just data being collected from a lot of different places and amplified during events, like natural disaster events. This is the Montana State Library's 2022 floods GIS data. So in June of 2022, of course, the Yellowstone flooding, Yellowstone National Park, Gardner, Red Lodge, those areas, record-breaking drought impact or flooding impacts. And so there's a lot of agencies that mobilize during those events and start collecting data and trying to understand that event and record it. DNRC might fly imagery and drone imagery during the event to understand the extent of the water. Department of Transportation, of course, needs to get out there and understand the impacts to roads and bridges. The USGS will start documenting, like the high water. What was the high water? Start documenting those processes. So all this data is being collected by these agencies, and this flood GIS data hub at the state library is about pulling that together and trying to broaden the use is really what it's about. So these are collected for specific programs. Let's make that available to more and broaden the use, make it more valuable. Another really good example, this is water-related GIS data, channel migration zones. This is data that I would describe as not really having a home before. This was being collected through grants by various agencies, various contractors, and it wasn't readily available. So we identified the state library as a home for that data, place where we could collect and distribute it. So this is showing channel migration zone for the Sun River between Fort Shaw and Sun River. And that orange is the blue shaded area is where the river has historically migrated back and forth within that blue shaded area. The orange is where could potentially be migrating, the channel migration zone, and then that red is avulsion or high erosion risk areas that could be cut, areas of bank that could be cut in rapidly, and the river could rapidly change within there. Those pink dots, those are structures. So those are like homes. So anyone kind of within that zone would be interested in this. You see Sun River there. Every year when there's flooding on the Sun River, there's impacts in the city of the town of Sun River there. You can see why that is. So the other tenet of the water information system is coordination and collaboration amongst water agencies. So I want to highlight a couple of those. The first I want to start on is drought. And I think drought's important because it impacts all of us. It's far reaching. Everyone's got a general concept of what drought is and is impacted by that in some way, whether it's lower precipitation amounts leading to fires. Of course, there's direct impacts on crops, growing wheat, raising cattle, things like that. Recreationists, fishing, warmer temperatures, less water, impact on the fishing community. And then there's this little bit more abstract mental health. There's studies across the nation that have shown that during drought, increased depression and increased suicide rates, especially amongst farmers and producers. There's nothing that is more impactful to producers and farmers. It's a direct impact on what they do in their livelihoods. The bottom there is just kind of pointing out how prolific drought is within Montana and most of the western states. It's a time series going back to the early 2000s on the left to current on the right. Some sort of drought, level of drought across the state just about every year. some better years there, but you can typically count on somewhere in Montana is experiencing drought conditions just about any time. So here in Montana, drought monitoring is a very collaborative process. There's 4 agencies that work on a weekly basis to map and monitor drought across the state. A little bit more detail than we can cover here, but the point here is that this is happening every single week, every Sunday, every Monday. We start to look through all the drought variables out there and do our best to map and monitor drought across the state. The output of that is these drought maps. On the left, you see the U.S. Drought Monitor map. This is created nationwide, and also Puerto Rico and the Pacific and Virgin Islands. That map indicates dry conditions. And then here in Montana, we also produce the map on the right that is by county, drought status by county, and that indicates both dry and wet conditions. I should point out that this is not current conditions. This is October of last year. So across the southern tier of the state, you're seeing a lot of precipitation throughout the summer and into the fall, versus up north, especially in Northwest, much drier conditions at that time. We have a process for the public to be involved, for citizens, farmers, ranchers, producers to provide input about the drought map and kind of alert us to early signs of drought, early impacts of drought. And that's called the Montana Drought Impact Reporter. That is housed at the Montana State Library. It is a live, ongoing survey that's available to anyone to submit observations. What's going on? What do you see out your window? What's it like where you live? Some examples there of pictures that have been submitted, and also some descriptions there. Just looking at that first one, grass growth and vegetation conditions are much better than the past 2 years. There was some green up in September that was continued into October. There are duck ponds that haven't been there in the past. So these serve as kind of early alerts for us, like areas to take a closer look at, or areas that help confirm the monitoring and mapping that we're doing. So this is a great resource for public citizens to come in and give us heads up on what's going on out there. It's so important because the actual network of weather stations is pretty sparse. And so there's ranches and farms, there's areas of the state that just aren't monitored at all. And so getting these local inputs from farmers and ranchers, or anyone for that matter, super valuable. The other piece of coordination and collaboration I want to touch on is related to our GIS themes. And this particular one talks about elevation data. This is high resolution, highly accurate elevation data that is being collected through a technology called LIDAR, light detection and ranging. And the state library serves as a coordinating body, helping bring together partners from across the state, local, private, tribal, state, federal, and try to gain support and funding support to acquire this type of data. So what are we talking about here? This is a LIDAR-derived elevation model. So it's very highly detailed information about the state's elevations. LIDAR is being flown across the state. We're going to have the entire state done by late 2025, early 2026. So really cool data. And I bring it up here because there's a lot of interest from the public. This data is being used for things like site planning. Maybe you're building a house. You want to put that in the flattest area. You want to understand how water will flow across the property. This elevation data can show you that. So the status of LIDAR across the state, this is the map. So this is showing what's available versus what's coming. The green areas, it's all available. And we have it at the state library. You can view it online and you can download it. The blue is what's in progress. So what we're going to have soon, like I said, we'll have the entire state done by late 2025, early 2026. So at first, it might not be obvious why elevation and LIDAR are important to water, or why it's a hot topic within water information. I think these images make it pretty clear. So these images are derived from LIDAR. They're solely based on elevation data. So on the left, this is Headwaters State Park, and the lowest elevations are shown in blue, which lowest elevations are going to correspond with where streams and rivers and lakes and ponds are at. The middle one is near Innis. That's the Madison as it enters the Innis Lake. You can see the detail there within the historic and old channels that come out within that LiDAR data. And on the right, a very stunning image from the Powder River near Broadus, and showing the relationship of some of these older historic channels and their relationship with agricultural fields. Pretty neat. So that's a perfect segue to my next topic, which is hydrography. The state library is the state steward of the Montana hydrography data set. And hydrography is the mapping of the streams, rivers, lakes, springs, ditches, all that information about water resources, surface water. So the state library is the steward of the data. We coordinate with the USGS. They're the national lead to map the streams, rivers, springs, ponds, lakes of the state, all the surface water across the state. Kind of the big news within hydrography is that it's going through an evolution right now, and over the next 5 to 8 years, we're going to see major changes in the mapping of hydrography within the state. It's going to be more detailed and better than ever, as it aligns with that elevation LiDAR data that I was just showing. So that was the last of my kind of data topic information that I was going to cover before we get into a demo of a few of these. But I wanted to make sure I covered how do you get help. Like I said, we're happy to help with water information at the state library. Any questions that are coming into your libraries or from the public across the state. We recently released a new ticketing system through ServiceNow for submitting questions and getting technical support. You click on the link there, GIS information help, and it'll bring up a form, a pretty easy form that you just fill out and submit. You see the address for submitting those at the bottom. You also find it from our home page. If you go up here to the digital library menu, you can get to a help, and that's how you submit those forms. So what types of questions might we field? We welcome really any kind of questions that patrons might have about water information, water resources in the state. These are some of the more common ones that I could think of. A lot of people moving to Montana, new homes, buying new property. Water rights are a big deal here in Montana. You might want to know what water rights are associated with your property, and what are some of the water rights of the neighbors, and how would that potentially impact you? How about a well log? So you're moving out into the country, you have your own well. You can find information on the well that's drilled there, how deep it is, what's the water level, things like that. Get questions about where do I find information about flooding? I showed those channel migration zones. Just gathering information about what are things like around my property. Questions about aerial imagery. Where can I find an aerial imagery from 10 years ago or from 1990 or historic imagery, and compare that to today? Mentioned LiDAR. We get lots of questions about LiDAR and detailed information about elevation data for site planning, building sites. How about just recreationists, tourists, fishermen, looking for maps, GIS data? So I think what's important with these is, as you know, as libraries, neutral and non-regulatory. That's really important. We're really focused on the information for all Montanans. We don't care why you need the data. We just want to help, and we want to get that information to you. And of course, patron confidentiality. Someone might want to come to the state library about water rights rather than going through the lead agency. So with that, I think I'm right about on time. I was hoping to hit about 10:20, take 5 minutes to walk through a demo. But I just want to touch on, kind of show you how to get through to some of these topics that I mentioned in my presentation. So Kalei, if you can just confirm that it switched over, you should be seeing the home page.
Yep, looks great.
So from our home page, is the state library's home page, finding the water information system under information services. And then in feature services, the water information system. Or at the top under digital library, water. So this is that Montana Water Information System homepage. Just showed this in one of my slides and circled some of the topics we're discussing. So I'm going to hit on a few of these kind of based on those common questions that I talked about. So water rights. Water rights, the lead agency is actually the DNRC. And they've got this water right query system where you can go in and search for water rights for your property. And what I want to show you today is how that might pair with another application. So this is the Montana Cadastral. It is housed at the state library, and this is information about your property. And many of you have probably used this. And so I'm just going to zoom in here, find a property. So this is somewhere around Townsend. And I can snag that geocode here. And then I can put that geocode into the water right query system. So I'm going to be searching for water rights that property that may be associated with that property. So you find a couple here. It looks like they have groundwater rights. They probably have a well for their property. And so there's the point representing that there's a well, and then that water can be used within that property. So a very quick way to find water right if you know the property address or the geocode. You just encourage also that as you're searching water rights, don't just search one way, like maybe come in and look by last name, search these other options. Geocodes often works well, but it's not complete for the entire state. So search in other ways as well.
Troy, there's a question. How do you report mistakes on the Montana Cadastral? It's an interesting question.
Yeah, so those can be reported to the state library, but in general, we'll probably have to redirect to the Department of Revenue. So all the data behind Cadastral, the owner name, the address, those sorts of things, those all need to go to the Department of Revenue. And on this Cadastral website, within the user guide, I believe, there should be a link in here to the field offices, the DOR field offices. Maybe it's here in data sources.
This new interface was just launched. Was it last week? Is that right, Troy?
Yeah. All right. So yeah, here. So to request your name be removed or like questions about, here it is up here. If you find errors in the property information, you must contact the DOR field office for the county, and it's got the link to the counties that you would contact. So you contact the county Department of Revenue, and they can fix that kind of information. So we're the public information, but we can't touch the data. So the data behind it is the Department of Revenue. It's a great question. Yeah. Like Clay said, we just released this last week. A brand new cadastral out there for folks. Back on the water information system, I want to touch on drought. We talked a lot about drought. Here's that resource. This is the main page for drought information. The county drought map and the U.S. drought monitor. And then below that are those drought impacts, that drought impact reporter. So this is people across the state submitting information about what conditions are like where they live. And below that is the actual survey. So people come to this survey and fill it out. There's quite a few questions in here, but not a lot that's required. So it's really about, you don't need to feel like you're an expert on drought or moisture or any of that. It's really about observations and what do you see? What do you think? How does this compare to the past years? And like I said, it just serves as an early alert for us to take a closer look at data. I think the last one that I really have time to touch on here is aerial imagery. I think this is a pretty common request. People love this stuff. So under the main menu, ortho imagery, there's this Montana Air Photo browser. And this has most of the imagery that we have at the state library. You can see on the right here, all the different years of imagery that have been collected. And then kind of an interesting one here is the very bottom, historic imagery. This is mid-20th century imagery. And so we can turn that on and go to a place like Canyon Ferry. And see what it looked like before the reservoir went in. It's pretty fascinating. So this is the floodplain. And then today, once the reservoir's been in. Pretty fascinating.
That is amazing.
Yeah. last thing I'll show here, and then we can open up for questions and wrap it up here. Just where to get help. So the easiest way to get to help is through the digital library here. This is our GeoInfo, our GIS team. Digital library help. And here's the form that you would fill out to request help. I think that's all I planned on covering, Colette. So I'd be happy to field questions for a few minutes and wrap it up here.
Yeah, if anyone has a question, if you'd like to unmute and ask Troy directly, that's great. Otherwise, I'll watch the chat here. There's so much information, and I really appreciate the way that you pose those questions, because I think those are common questions that some of our libraries might have presented to them. Somebody walks in, as you described, and wants to know more about the property that they're interested in that. And because the state library is this great aggregator of data and information and has ways to present that information that's really accessible to the public, I just think that that's amazing. So I'll be quiet for a second here and see if anyone has a question that they'd like to unmute and ask.
That was really well put, Clay. That's exactly right. I talk quite a bit about GIS data, and like we make a really strong effort to make sure that that's available through like an online viewer. So you don't have to necessarily be a GIS person or download the data. We make it as available as we can online, view it online.
Some folks might be formulating their questions, so I'm gonna lob a couple of softball questions to you. Troy, so what's the most fun part of your job? Seeing all of this information that you're responsible for, really, what's the most fun part of what you do?
I think it is that variety of information. Like I just love it. Like there's just so much, and always learning. Just being able to work with like LiDAR is fairly new to me. Like I hadn't worked with LiDAR prior to 3 years ago, and then kind of fell on my plate to help lead that. And it's absolutely fascinating on data. And so just the wide variety of data that I get to work with.
That's cool. So then what's the most technical part of your job?
The technical side is the processing of all that data. Just thinking of LiDAR, it comes in as these hundreds of thousands, millions of point measurements, and that's got to be processed through GIS and pretty detailed workflows to then create kind of a usable elevation model that the human can visualize. So definitely the GIS processing, working with the data, is the most challenging technical side of my job.
Yes, my mind is blown by just how that data, the points and the bits and the bytes, gets translated into something that a layperson like myself can actually perceive and use. Okay, so then my last other question is, what would you recommend? Like everybody has their routine in the morning. I check the news headlines, I check my weather app. What piece of water information or what you presented would you recommend people put into their daily playlist of information to check?
That's a tough one. I think probably drought. I think that's kind of, for me, that's the kind of the overarching topic, is what are moisture conditions like? Because that drives our streams, that drives snow melt, that drives fishing, drives all that stuff. And so kind of keeping a bead on what's going on with drought and where it's more severe than other places can help you kind of understand what impacts your communities might be seeing. So, drought's such a broad topic, but it is this overencompassing like representation of really all that's going on within water.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're all at that point in the year where we're wondering, are we going to be seeing more clouds with rain? Are we going to be seeing more smoke? So I agree. Exactly. I think that's really interesting. And so we will be posting links and the slides from this presentation today. I just posted a link in the chat. We really welcome your feedback, and so if you'd fill out our evaluation form, that would be great. The other thing I always mention is that we have a lot of upcoming webinars, several more to come this month, including one on that's kicking off a series that we're doing on connecting with local governments. So check the YouTube channel, check the Aspen calendar, let us know through that feedback survey what you think. And with that, I just want to say if there are any questions, we'll hang out here for a few minutes. But thank you so much, Troy, for sharing this with us. I think that we're going to have a lot of interest, and just being able to share out these resources is going to make a difference for those librarians who are on the front line and answering those questions as their patrons come to them for answers. So thank you so much.
Yeah, you're very, very welcome. Appreciate everybody joining us.
Thanks.